Psalm 23, a very well-known psalm. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. May God's anointing and blessing be on the message and on Dan's sermon this morning.
I thought I would start today with just a little bit of fun and say, for the sake of argument, let's say that I don't believe in God. Just for the sake of argument, let's say I don't believe in God, but I've been watching all of you, and I notice that you do these crazy things, like you wake up on Sunday morning and go to church. You could sleep in much longer, right? You could be out on the golf course. You could be watching the Cubs and Cards play, whatever the case may be. But I've been watching you, and I notice that you come to church, and I'm kind of searching, and I'm questioning, and I'm wondering, and so what would you say if I were to come up to you and say, tell me why you believe in God? How many of you would be comfortable answering that question? Tell me why you believe in God. When I think about...
Because the Cubs are 9.5 games ahead of the Cardinals.
And that is an act of God, right? No.
Confusing that with hell freezing over, but that's okay.
Oh, that's beautiful. So when we think about how many Christians in the church today would be comfortable answering that question, my guess is not as many as should be. And for many of us, if somebody were to come up and say, why do you believe in God? We might come up with answers like, well, I don't know, I just do. Can you imagine somebody? I don't know, I just do. Or I don't know, I guess I believe in God because my parents believed and I trusted my parents. Or I believe in God or because, I go to church and all my friends believe, or because I was born in America, a Christian nation, right? And so how many of us would really feel comfortable answering that question, why I believe in God? How many of us would be able to give a good answer to that would be meaningful for somebody who doesn't believe? For somebody who the fact that your parents believe, that's not a good enough answer for them. Because, there are people that would not be a good enough answer for. Absent from any of those responses is any idea of personal experience. It's like faith by surrogate. I believe because somebody else did. And I just trust somebody else. But there's a time in which we have to say, my faith is my own. I believe not because my parents did. I believe not because I'm fellowshipping in a church that believes. I believe because I believe. Because I have examined the evidence and I've become convinced. Because I have witnessed God's handiwork in my life, whether that's the Cubs being on top of the Cards or whatever, right? I've witnessed God's handiwork. I've experienced God's presence. I've felt his touch. I found his word to be true and his promises to be true. I've witnessed what God has done. At some point we should be able to say, I once believed because my parents did. For some of us, that may not be the case for all of us, right? But for my journey, I could say, there was a time that I would have said, well, I believed because my mom and dad believed, and, I learned it from them. But there was a very significant point in my life when I said, I no longer believe because my parents do. I believe because I do. Because I have felt the touch of God. Because I have walked with him, I've learned his word and his promises are true and so on. When you think about the power of Psalm 23, Psalm 23 is a psalm that speaks to our hearts and it brings us comfort. And it's not because it's filled with all these biblical promises and all these things, but it's because it comes from the voice of personal experience. It's not an academic lecture that's plumbing the depths of theology, but it's the reflections of a man of God on life. A man who has been on top of the mountain, and a man who's been in the deepest of valleys, and what he has learned about God along the way. In particular, he's learned that Elohim, our mighty creator, is a God who's personable enough to relate to us as Yahweh Rohi, which is the Lord our shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. Now, translations of Rohi include various words. Translations that I found was feeder, keeper, companion, friend, pastor, herdsman, and of course, shepherd. And the Hebrew word means to tend or pasture or shepherd. So Herbert Lockyer, he kind of puts all these together and he says, thus the Lord is the feeder to provide, keeper to protect, companion to cheer, friend to help, pastor to comfort, herdsman to gather, and the shepherd to lead. Yahweh Rohi, the Lord is my shepherd. Now, of course, we can quickly look at the New Testament and we can see how this name applies to Jesus Christ as well, right? Jesus said, I am the good shepherd who will lay down his life for his sheep. We see in Hebrews where it says that he is the great shepherd who raised from the dead. And then I believe it's Peter who says he is the chief shepherd who oversees and rewards the faithful, or the church. So we see how this title applies to Jesus as well. But I don't know about the rest of you. Sometimes it's fun to listen to people speak and interact with people of various histories and past. And have you ever heard somebody say, where you have a mix of either the husband's a faithful believer and the wife's not, or vice versa, and they might come with a comment like, well, she has enough faith for the both of us. You ever hear anybody talk like that? Well, she hasn't, or she's disciplined enough for the both of us. She'll go to church. She's got me covered, right? She's going to church. She goes to church enough for the both of us. Well, notice a very important word in Psalm 23, and that's the word my. The Lord is my shepherd. Nobody can have a relationship with God for you. You don't come to God by proxy. She can't have enough faith for the both of you. Nor is it simply enough to be part of a church body. Sometimes people think church membership is like fire insurance. As long as I have my name on a piece of paper, I'm good to go, right? Well, I'm good with God because I'm a member of such and such church down the street on the corner. I haven't been there for 10 or 5 decades, right? I haven't been there for 5 decades, but I'm a member, by golly. And I'm going to call in that card when my death comes, right? Or they think of baptism as sin's escape clause. It goes kind of like this. Well, I got baptized, so I escaped from church, right? Because I don't need it anymore. Isn't that what we see? How often do we see that in churches? Well, once somebody's baptized, they just kind of disappear. Because we have this wrong thinking. Nobody can have a relationship with God for you. And the more and more we see the church acquiesce to the culture, the less Christ-like the church is becoming. The less Christian the church is becoming. The more false teaching is going to be there. And, I don't know a whole lot, but I do know that on that final day there's going to be lots of surprises. And there will be some who cried out, Lord, Lord, and Jesus is going to say, depart from me, for I never knew you. That's scriptural, right? Matthew chapter 7. So the first question that we always need to ask is the Lord my shepherd? Have I walked in relationship with him? Because until that matter is settled, nothing else matters. It doesn't matter how nice the car you drive. Just on the way in today, we came up and this guy was playing. Hannah said we was getting secondhand music because they were playing the radio so loud. Just happened it was Christian music anyway, so we're fine with that. But he pulls out and he's driving a Toyota Camry, and on the license plate it said BMW. And so Amanda and I made a comment, said, well, I guess that's what you do when you can't afford the BMW, right? You just put it on your license plate. Now I forgot why I'm saying that. The Lord is my shepherd. Oh, I remember. Until that matter's settled, nothing else matters. Doesn't matter how nice the car you drive. Doesn't matter how big the house you live in. Doesn't matter the comforts that you have. Until the matter of is Jesus my shepherd is settled, everything else is meaningless. Success in the world, meaningless. if you're not in relationship with him. You know, some people, they don't rush into anything. They're very calculated. They want to know all the details. They want to make their pros and their cons list and examine the evidence. So let's kind of take a peek at who Yahweh Rohi is. Because with the Lord as our shepherd, you shall not lack. In verse 1, and I noticed that Terry has a newer translation, because the newer translation has it differently. But in the old NIV translation, it says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. I shall not be in want. You know, we live in a very discontented culture. We have more, but we enjoy it less. Is that fair enough to say? I mean, most of us, we have far more than our parents ever did, but we enjoy it less. We have more, we enjoy it less. We take a look around us, and we frequently want what we do not have and what we cannot afford. And all the while, we fear losing what we possess. And so one of the things that we're very quick to do is we're quick to point out to somebody else, well, is that a need or is that a want, Rich? And we do this with our kids too, right? Is that a need or is that a want? And we're very quick to point out to somebody else the difference between needs and wants while we're very blurry on the line for ourselves. Well, I think I need that. Do you really need it? We're quick to point it out for others, but we're blurry when it comes to ourselves. And it perhaps enables us to misinterpret this verse a little bit, which the newer translation is helping to kind of steer us around. The problem is we often look to the world to supply what only God can give. And so rather than coming to God, we rationalize, well, if I only had a little more money, I'll be happy. If I only get a better job, I'll be happy. If I only had a few more comforts to enjoy, I'll be happy. If I only find the right relationship, then I'll be happy. And it kind of occurred to me this past week that, you know, when we're looking to all these things of the world to supply what only God can give, it's kind of like a drug. You get that better job, and boy, you're happy. But what happens to that high? You know, this new job has people I don't like as well, that I don't get along with. Everything wasn't as fun as I thought it would be. And all of a sudden, that high, it just kind of begins to fade away. And then what do you need? Well, I need a better job. Or you get that pay raise, and boy, you get that pay raise, and you're happy. But then, well, that momentary high kind of fades, and well, I can use a little bit more. In fact, you know, they've done studies. If you ask, and I don't remember the date of the study, and it's been a while, I wasn't going to use it today, but when they did this study, they said if they asked a person making $40,000 a year what they need to live the life of their dreams, the answer was $80,000. But if you asked somebody making $80,000 what they needed to live the life of their dreams, their answer was $160,000. And almost across the board, it was always double. Everybody always thought I needed about twice what I'm making to live the life of my dreams. It's kind of like a drug. You know, the momentary high fades, and then you need more of the same thing to get the same result, because we're looking to the world to supply what only God can give. C.S. Lewis made a comment. He said that our desires are not too strong, they're too weak. And some of us, we might think, well, that seems a little off. You know, I'm not so sure about that. My desire is too strong. That's why I can't break this habit, or I can't change this pattern of behavior, or you know, I keep wanting more money. You know, I think maybe my desire is too strong. But he says our desires are not too strong, they're too weak. And the point that he makes is they're too weak in that we allow the things of the world to satisfy us instead of God. He says our desire for God is too weak. Our desire for God is too weak, and so we're turning to all these things of the world instead. When David says in Psalm 1, I shall not be in want, you know, think about the journey that David's been on. David spent some time in the palace before he found himself hiding in a cave. That's a change in home environment, isn't it? And he ended up fleeing for his life. He had this spell where he had to hide in the midst of his enemies. You know, when David says, I shall not want, he was not using the term want how we frequently use it today. And the meaning is clearly not that I would have all that I want, such as that BMW or whatever the case may be. But as the new translation made clear, that I will lack nothing that I need. In fact, have you ever known somebody who had a spoiled, rotten child? Yeah? We probably have known some, right? You're like, man, that child needs to hear the word no, right? We've all been there. We've known people who had spoiled, rotten children because they never heard the word no, because they always got everything they wanted and never was told what they needed to hear. You know, sometimes we need to pause and say, God, thank you for the things you chose not to give me. Think about that for a moment. Because God knows better than we do. Sometimes we need to pause and give him thanks for the things that he doesn't give. Now, that doesn't mean that God never goes over and above. If you delight yourself in the Lord, he will give you the desires of your heart. But we need to keep in mind that when you delight yourself in the Lord, he changes the desires of your heart. So there's something different that you're wanting. But when he says, I shall not lack, or I shall not want, that includes finding rest. I find it very interesting because, you know, as I was standing up here today, I'm like, man, everybody just seems weary. There's just a feeling of weariness, of tiredness in our place today. And you know, it's kind of a, you know, anybody ever wake up and it's overcast and it's cloudy outside and it's kind of rainy and your first thought is, what a beautiful day to sleep in. You ever hear that? But you know, sometimes there's a ray of sun that comes through. And I think sometimes, you know, there's that overcast and there's that sense of we're just tired and weary, we just want to sleep. Sometimes you just have to hold on to that ray of light that's coming through. Say, I'm going to give God thanks for that ray of light, and I'm going to find energy in that ray of light. But he says, they shall not lack, and that includes finding rest. We are a weary people. And part of that is because we're always on the go. We're either on the go physically, you know, our calendars just, we're here one night, we're here the next, we're just always on the go physically or emotionally or intellectually. And part of that is because we're driven by fear or by want. I bet some of you, your busiest time of day is when your head hits the pillow. Because your head hits the pillow and you're running through everything of the day and you're running through everything that you have to do tomorrow. It's like there is no rest, is there? We're just continually on the go. And there was a season in my life years ago, and I don't mind being busy. In fact, I'd rather be busy than not have something to do. But there was times when I was at Colfax and Aerosmith that I was busy. I was like always on the go. There's always pastoral care needs. There was things going on. And I remember really thriving on being busy because busy made me feel important. Busy made me feel, you know, kind of like handing out my business card today, right? It's like, oh, you may not want it, but let me give it to you. It makes me feel important, right? But busy made me feel important, and busy came with words of praise, and it kind of fed self-worth. And so you might complain on the one hand, it's like, man, I've been working hard, been having lots of hours. So you complain on the one hand, while on the other hand, you kind of enjoy it all at the same time. Kind of an interesting dilemma, isn't it? But maybe you've had that season in your life where you thought, who has time to rest? There's just so much to do. Or maybe you've been in the other boat. It's like it takes too much energy to rest because there's this battle that's raging within me. And when I'm resting, all I'm doing is thinking about everything I need to be doing or everything that I should be doing instead. And there's that battle that's raging in you because there's a desire for more. Whether it's praise, whether it's security, whether it's comfort, whether it's entertainment, whether it's toys, however you want to define toys, you know, little cheap, little Tykes or big Harley Davidsons, right? Or toys or whatever the case may be. There's just this idea of wanting more. But when we come to the place of truly knowing Yahweh Rohi, that our needs are taken care of, that we will not lack that which we need, we come to a place that we can truly experience rest. Even in the midst of chaos, where we can experience rest. We come to verse 2, and he says, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. Now, Tony Evans, he kind of emphasizes that word makes. And he says, there are times that God makes you lie down. Now, I don't discount that there may be times that God makes you lay down, but and he emphasizes that, and he talks about how there's times God makes you lay down in green pastures. But that's not the image I get from Psalm 23. You know, that force. You know, it's kind of like when you tell the toddler, you are going to lay down for a nap. Or you're going to eat your vegetables and you're going to like them, right? Well, you might get them to heat them, but maybe not so much like them. But he emphasizes the word makes. Well, the causative form of the verb, how's that sound for scholarly to you? That means I took it from a commentary. The causative form of the verb doesn't mean as much forced to as that I'm free to. I'm in a place where I can truly rest. I'm free to rest. There's no enemies. There's no threats. I'm not feeling threatened. Green pastures, quiet waters. I'm truly at a place where I feel I can rest. You know, rest is vital to well-being. God purposely created a day of rest. Did you know that? On 6 days, God created, and what about that seventh day? God rested. He purposely created a day of rest. With proper rest in the Lord, less can become more. You might call it God's math. Less can become more. You know, I like being productive, but I remember in particular when I was opening 5 days a week at Four Seasons and getting up at 4 every morning. And, you know, farmers, you do that all the time, right? And I would wake up and I would go work at Four Seasons and I would come home and you know, have you ever tried to read a commentary when you've been up since 4 in the morning? You know, you sit there and you're trying to do research and you're reading and it kind of looked like this. It kind of looked like, right? Kind of like some of you on Sunday mornings, right? It's like you're interested, you're engaged, but it's everything you can do to stay awake. And what happens is you read the same words over and over and over again. Isn't it interesting? We can never move on to the next line. And I remember thinking, Dan, you just need a nap. And also thinking that, who's got time for a nap? I've got too much to do. And you sit there and fight. Well, I finally got wise. And I learned that, hey, you know, if I took a 20-minute nap, the rest of the afternoon was far more productive, far more effective. I was able to actually get something done, right? With proper rest, less is more. There comes a place that we just need to find rest in the Lord, so that he can restore us, so that he can renew us, so that we can go and engage in the rest of what we need to do. He comes into verse 3, and he says, he restores my soul. The meaning of restore is to bring back. Perhaps some of you have had the experience of restoring furniture or restoring cars. You know, you take something that's been beaten up by life, something that maybe is even broken and doesn't run properly, and you bring it back to life and beauty. That's kind of the image of he restores my soul. He brings me back. You know, like it or not, we're damaged goods. We've been hurt. We've been hurt emotionally. We've been hurt physically. We've been hurt spiritually. And he restores my soul. It's a picture of how God brings us back into vitality, how God renews us in strength, how he renews us in vigor, how he gives us what we need so that we can come back to life and beauty. And he might do it through worship. He might do it through times of praise. He might do it through sending somebody your way with a timely word. If you ever have one of those seasons that you're at your wit's end and somebody comes along and they just say the right thing at the right time. He might do it through a timely word. He might do it through his word, just a touch of his spirit. But it's kind of like the green pastures and the quiet waters. He restores us in whatever form they might come. Now, something that's important for us to understand, because here shepherds do things differently here than they do in the East. And the shepherds did not drive the sheep, they guided the sheep. That means the shepherd's out front. So what does that mean about us? It means if we're not keeping our eye on the shepherd, we can get distracted very easily. If we start looking over here and over here, you know, we can easily get sidetracked from where the shepherd's trying to take us. Because we all, like sheep, are prone to wander. We're prone to go astray because we take our eyes off of him. We had the experience of having Don ride with us when we went to Manitou. And it was an interesting experience because we're driving and we have Google Maps. We have it all up on Google Maps. And so we're going, and Google Maps has us going straight down a road. And Don back there, Google Maps wasn't good for Don, you know. I'm not going to mention any names to put Don on the spot, but Google Maps wasn't good for Don, and so he pulled out his Apple in the back seat, and he pulled up the directions on his Apple phone. And we're driving down this street, and Google has us going straight, and Apple says, turn right here. We're like, that's interesting. You know, I always learned that the shortest distance to a point is a straight line, right? Turn right here. I'm like, well, Google has us going straight. We're sticking with Google. And we drive another quarter mile down the road, and Apple says, turn left here. I'm like, okay, now it was right, now it's left. And then we go down another quarter mile, it's like, turn right here. And it continually had us going this way or this way or this way, anywhere but straight. Remember that, Don?
Preach it, brother.
You know, think about what's healthy for you. You ask one person, they give you one answer. You ask another person, they give you another answer. Where are we getting our directions from? Are we getting our directions from a culture that shifts with the times, that adjusts with new learnings, that operates out of self-interest? Are we getting our directions from a God whose truth stands forever? He guides us in paths of righteousness. He guides us in paths of righteousness. Too often we're listening to Apple when we should be going straight, right? Sorry, Apple, right? Your destination is only as certain as your guide is reliable. It's important that we trust our Lord to guide us. He is Yahweh Rohi, and He is a shepherd who guides us. Now, our trust in our shepherd is going to be tested because unfortunately, you've probably already experienced this, life is not just about green pastures and still waters. And there are times that we need that rest. There are times that we need that restoration and that healing. But oftentimes we need that rest and that healing and restoration so that we're better prepared to go through the valley. Valleys are necessary. You know, you might remember in the Transfiguration, Peter had this wonderful experience on the mountaintop. We love mountaintops. But he wasn't supposed to stay on the mountaintop, was he? Because the work of ministry was down in the valley. We love mountaintops, but the valleys are also necessary. And to go from one mountaintop to another mountaintop, guess what you have to do? Go through the valley. You have to go through the valley. Now, in the valleys, there were deep shadows in which danger lurked. And most of us have learned the verse, the valley of the shadow of death. You heard Terry's translation say darkest valley, which is, or dark valley or something like that, because actually it's probably a more literal translation. We just kind of put in the shadow of death. But in these dark shadows, there were wild animals, there were bandits, there were robbers, outlaws of all sorts, and, you know, some of you might say in-laws, right? But it was a place of fear, because as they're going through the valley, there were dangers in all these shadows. And they never knew what was behind the corner because they couldn't see. And as we think about the Lord as our shepherd, God doesn't exempt us from the valley, but He does promise His presence and His protection as He takes us through the valleys. And so in verse 4, He says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, it's kind of ironic because sometimes it's in the dark times that we're able to see more clearly, that God's name is revealed to us more fully. You know, mountaintops are cool. We enjoy the mountaintops. We enjoy that sense of blessing and being in the presence of God and hearing His voice. But there's certain things that only happen in the valley as well. Learnings that occur in the valley, ministry that occurs in the valley. And as I was thinking about it, you know, sometimes we struggle and we think, well, if God is our shepherd, if God is tending and caring for His sheep, then why does He allow us to undergo some of the trials we go through? Why does He allow us to experience some of the hurt that we experience? Why does He allow us to go through some of the disease that maybe we experience, and whatever the case may be? And we're like, why, if He's tending and caring for a sheep, does God allow that to happen? When you're going through a difficult time, Is it more helpful for you to have somebody come alongside you that never experienced anything remotely similar to what you're going through? Or is it more beneficial for you to have somebody come alongside you who's been there, done that, and overcome? My guess is it's somebody who's been there and done that and overcome. Is it not possible that a loving God allows some of his sheep to go through the valleys so that we can come alongside those who are not yet his sheep? And we can minister to them because we've been comforted in our affliction. We can minister to them and we can say, let me tell you how God brought me through. Let me tell you what my shepherd did for me. And through that, you're able to help them find the Lord. That sounds like a loving thing, isn't it? Let me tell you what God has done for me. You know, the valleys are places that the character formation takes place, but it's also through those valleys that we're able to better minister to other people and helping them grow in their own walk with God and to come to find him. Now, the shepherd might carry a belt and a cloth, and when he would find a lost sheep, he might spread that cloth and put some grass and fodder on it to be easily eaten. And while in the presence of the shepherd, you know, it kind of kept some of the predators away, so there was a sense of protection. And so some people stick with the shepherd image while others shift to a different image when you hit verse 5, because in verse 5, it says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Now, you might notice the difference. In verses 1 through 3, we have green pastures and quiet waters, and there's no hint whatsoever of any threat. In verse 5, we have a table in the presence of enemies. And scholars kind of differ. Well, there's two different ways we could look at the table in the presence of enemies. One was, in that culture, hospitality was very, very important. And so if I were your host, I was not only preparing your table, but you came under my protection. If you were in my home, you were under my protection. And it was something that was very, very important and very, very respected in their culture. So some take the sense of he's able to enjoy this table in the presence of enemies because they're under God's care, God's protection. So it doesn't matter the enemies that are out there. If I'm under God's protection, God is greater, and I'm good. I can feast, I can eat. The other picture that some take with this verse is, if you had a conquered enemy, they might be watching you dine at your celebration at the victory table. So might be eating in the presence of those who have been defeated, the conquered enemy. They've already been defeated, and so on. When you think about growing spiritually, spiritual maturity comes when you've walked with the shepherd through the valleys in order that you can now feast at his table in the presence of your enemies. Because you come to know him and trust him that deeply. Whether some of those enemies have already been defeated, some of them might still be present, but you know the shepherd well enough. You've been with the shepherd long enough. You know you're under his protection, and you're able to feast and enjoy the victory that he's given over defeated foes or foes that may still be present. I hope that makes sense anyway. You might look at the encouragement. He says, you anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. You could kind of carry that theme with both images too. Sheep would wander into the thicket and they would get cuts from the briars and the thorns, and the shepherd would anoint them with oil for healing. But the other piece was when a guest came into your home, you would welcome them and anoint them with oil to make them feel welcome and honored as your guest. Yahweh Rohi tends to the wounds that are incurred in the valley, and as your host, he welcomes and anoints you. And there are some here who are wounded and who are in need of healing. And you need to know the shepherd in that way. You just need to know that there is healing for you. There are others who need to discover that you have an anointing in the Lord, that he has anointed you, that you may have gifts that you're not even aware of, but he has anointed you for a purpose. And you need to know that he has a purpose and a meaning for you. I find it intriguing that the picture of the cup that overflows, that emerges after recounting the valleys. Even though I've walked through the valley of the shadow of death, there's some things, there's some joy, there's some things that we only experience when we allow God to use us in the valley. You know what I mean? When you know God has used you to minister to somebody else. Terry made a comment in Sunday school this morning. She goes, sometimes she came back from the used book ministry and she said, I'm just physically worn out. And they're like, aren't you just worn out? But she said, inside she was full of joy. Inside she was full of energy because she knew God was using her. That's an overflowing cup. That's an overflowing cup. It comes from being used by God in ministry. We come to verse 6, and in verse 6, he says, surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I would dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And when I read that verse, my first thought was, why follow me? Goodness and love will follow me. I'm thinking, I kind of have this picture. I'm walking into a room, and there's nothing but trouble here. But, hey, goodness and love, they're following me. They're catching up. I'm like, and I walk in, and there's trouble and there's trial, but goodness and love are following me. It's like, I'd rather goodness and love precede me, right? So I walk into a room and there's not trouble, there's goodness and love, right? Wouldn't that be a better picture? The truth of the matter is sometimes we can't see the goodness and love of God except in the mirror looking back. There are times we certainly can't see it in advance, and times that we struggle to believe it in the present, but looking back we discover it was always there. His goodness and his love. Looking back, we discover it was always there. Now, actually, the verb literally means that his goodness and love accompany me or go with me. So that's really the better picture. Wherever I go, whatever trial I experience, whatever I walk into, his goodness and love is there with me. It's not so much that it's following or pursuing, it's there with me. Now, in this beautiful psalm, we see Yahweh Yireh, we see God our provider, we see Yahweh Shalom, the Lord our peace, we see Yahweh Rapha, the Lord who heals, Yahweh Sidkenu, the Lord our righteousness, Yahweh Nisi, the Lord my banner, Yahweh Makidiskim, and I know I didn't say that right, so the Lord who sanctifies, and they're all contained in this one image of Yahweh Rohi, the Lord my shepherd. Is it any wonder it's such a comforting psalm for us? Some of you need to find those, to lay down in those green pastures where he can restore your soul. For some, you need to accept his guidance in the way of righteousness. Perhaps you're walking through the dark valley, and you need reminded that you need not fear because he is with you, or to sit at his table and to be reminded of how he has anointed and called you. None of us are exempt from the dark valley. The difference is whether or not you choose to go through it on your own or to go through it with the shepherd. Because as our shepherd, he knows how to guide you where you need to go while he provides rest and restoration in the midst of the journey. The question I think that really confronts us is, as his sheep, how closely are we following? Yahweh Rohi, the Lord is my shepherd. Are you walking with him today? In your bulletins, you have a communication card